My home of 37 years gone. My son's wife offered me shelter, then turned me into her personal housekeeper. Her mother called me a charity case to guests, while I bit back tears, scrubbing floors until my hands were raw. But some kindness comes with too high a price. I wonder what you would do. Like, share, and let us know where you are listening from. Elara, a woman of 64 years, found herself on her hands and knees, the cold linoleum of a grand kitchen seeping through the worn fabric of her trousers. The pungent scent of harsh chemical cleaner stung her nostrils, but the tears blurring her vision were not from the fumes. They welled up from a deep, raw humiliation that gnawed at her insides. This was not her kitchen. This was the sprawling, immaculate domain of Seraphina's parents, a house where Elara was no longer a respected guest, but an unpaid, unwelcome servant. It had been barely 2 weeks since her world had imploded. The for sale sign that had appeared on her own home, the sanctuary she had lovingly nurtured for 37 years, had felt like a tombstone. Her late husband's illness, a cruel and relentless thief, had slowly drained not only his strength, but every last penny they possessed. Medical bills, unforgiving and insurmountable, had swallowed their savings, their assets, and finally their home, leaving Elara with nothing but the stark reality of eviction. Then came Seraphina's seemingly gracious offer. "Mother Elara, you can stay with us, of course," her daughter-in-law had chirped, her voice dripping with a sweetness Elara now recognized as saccharine, "just until you get back on your feet." Elara, adrift and desperate, had grasped at the lifeline with a profound sense of relief, but the lifeline had quickly morphed into a leash, and her temporary refuge into an unspoken, oppressive contract of domestic servitude. The first few days had been subtle, cloaked in polite requests. "Could you perhaps help with the dishes, Mother Elara?" Then, "The guest bathroom could use a wipe down." Soon the polite requests dissolved into direct commands delivered by Seraphina or her mother Elara with an air of entitled expectation. Each chore, no matter how small, seemed to come with an implicit and sometimes explicitly stated criticism. The dust wasn't truly gone, the corners were missed, the gleam wasn't quite bright enough. It was a relentless chipping away at her capabilities, her dignity. Just moments ago, a sharp, clear voice had cut through the quiet hum of the house. "Mrs. Elara, could you clean the bathroom upstairs? Our guests will be arriving soon, and it simply won't do." It was Eleanor, Seraphina's mother, her voice carrying from the living room, a subtle note of impatience in its tone. Elara paused, her rag hovering over a stubbornly sticky spot on the floor. Mrs. Elara, not Mother Elara, not even Elara. It was a deliberate, almost imperceptible shift, a subtle but effective way to establish distance, to underscore her place as an outsider, a hired hand. Gratitude. It was a heavy cloak, suffocating her, binding her tongue. She was supposed to be grateful. Grateful for a roof over her head, for food on the table, for not being out on the streets. But with each scrub of the floor, each perfectly folded towel, each stinging critique, the gratitude became harder to swallow. It was a bitter pill that lodged in her throat, refusing to go down. She had once attempted to offer genuine assistance, suggesting she could help with gardening, an area she had always loved, or even preparing meals. Seraphina had waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, Mother Elara, your assistance is hardly necessary. We have our own way of doing things. And honestly, it's a bit of a burden to show you everything." The word burden hung in the air, cold and pointed, a thinly veiled threat, hinting at long-term plans that clearly did not involve Elara regaining her independence, much less being an equal contributor. Elara's mind drifted back. Her son, Alistair, so bright, so full of promise. She had raised him alone after his father died tragically young. 3 jobs she had worked, sometimes 4, her hands perpetually calloused, her body aching, just to put food on their table and ensure he had everything he needed. She had sacrificed so much, poured her very soul into him. Yet here she was, in his wife's parents' home, being treated with such dismissive disdain. The words, "I raised your husband," burned on her tongue, a fiery retort she desperately wanted to unleash. But she said nothing. What good would it do? It would only confirm Seraphina's veiled accusations of her being difficult, ungrateful, perhaps even mad with grief. The previous afternoon, a small, inconsequential chipped plate had been discovered in the sink. "Mother Elara," Seraphina had said, holding it up like a piece of incriminating evidence. Her eyes narrowed with feigned disappointment. "Were you not careful with the dishes? These are family heirlooms. We expect a certain level of attentiveness." Elara knew she hadn't chipped it. She was meticulously careful with everything she touched in this house, acutely aware of her precarious position. But the accusation hung there, unchallenged, adding another layer to her quiet shame, a silent indictment she was powerless to refute. "Just be careful, please," Seraphina had concluded, her voice deceptively soft, a silk glove concealing a fist of steel. By evening, her back ached with a dull, persistent throb. Her hands, usually soft from years of office work and gentle gardening, were now raw and red, the skin stretched and sensitive from constant exposure to harsh cleaning chemicals. Yet every item on Seraphina's impossibly long and demanding list for the day had been completed. The floors gleamed, the surfaces shone, the bathroom sparkled. She was exhausted, bone-weary, yet there was no praise, no simple word of thanks. Later, as she retrieved a forgotten cleaning cloth from the downstairs hallway, she overheard hushed voices drifting from the living room, Seraphina's parents and their newly arrived guests. "Such a burden, really," Eleanor's voice, laced with a pity that felt sharper than any direct insult, cut through the air. "Alistair's mother, you know, lost her home. We simply couldn't turn her away." The conversation continued, a symphony of polite commiseration. All about her, yet not including her, dissecting her misfortune like a morbid curiosity. The next morning, the humiliation deepened. Eleanor, conversing with a neighbor over coffee on the porch, had pointedly lowered her voice, though not enough to prevent Elara from hearing every word. "Oh, Elara? She's Alistair's mother, poor dear. A charity case, really. We're just giving her a place to stay out of the goodness of our hearts." Elara had been in the garden pruning overgrown rose bushes, a task she had taken on without being asked, hoping to contribute in a way that felt less menial, less subservient. Her cheeks burned, a fiery blush of shame that she couldn't control, a testament to the raw wound Eleanor's words inflicted. "And you know," Eleanor continued, her voice rising slightly, ensuring the neighbor and Elara heard, "she's not really used to maintaining a proper household like ours. We have to be rather specific with her instructions." Bless her heart. The patronizing tone, the open criticism, the implication of her own inadequacy chipped away at Elara's dignity, piece by agonizing piece. She had maintained a beautiful, spotless home for decades, a space of order and comfort. Her home had been her sanctuary, her pride. Now it was stripped away, and with it, her very sense of self-worth. That afternoon, Seraphina had found her in the entryway, polishing the already gleaming marble floor. "Mother Elara," she had purred, her eyes scanning the perfectly reflective surface. "Are you quite sure this is clean? I see a smudge, perhaps?" Elara squinted, her eyes searching the immaculate surface. There was nothing. The floor was spotless, mirroring her tired reflection. But Seraphina's smile, thin and sharp, indicated otherwise. "Perhaps you should re-clean it. I like my entryway to sparkle, don't you?" It was a command, not a question, and Elara sensed a cruel enjoyment in Seraphina's tone, a satisfaction in exercising her power, in breaking Elara's spirit with meaningless tasks. Now, on her knees once more, Elara stared at the same spotless entryway floor. Her knees protested with a dull ache as she shifted her weight, a protest echoed by the deeper ache in her soul. She picked up the bucket of fresh, soapy water and a clean rag, preparing to clean the marble for the third time that day. The water, warm at first, would soon grow cold, mirroring the chilling realization that was settling deep within her heart. This wasn't about cleaning. This was about control, about diminishing her, about making her understand her place. And Elara, for the first time, felt something other than gratitude begin to stir within her, a flicker of defiance in the quiet corner of her weary mind. Elara resumed her cleaning, the familiar scent of lemon-scented cleaner now tainted with a bitter aftertaste. Her knees ached, protesting against the hard marble, but she pushed through the discomfort, her movements careful and deliberate. She focused on the rhythm of the mop, seeking a meditative escape from the crushing weight of her circumstances. But escape was not to be found. A shadow fell over her, and Elara knew without looking that Seraphina was standing over her, her presence a cold, palpable weight. Elara could feel the scrutinizing gaze on her back, assessing every stroke of the mop, every inch of the gleaming floor. After a moment, a stick, dramatic and heavily laden with judgment, floated down. Mother Elara, Seraphina's voice purred, saccharine sweet but with an unmistakable edge of condescension. Are you truly putting in your best effort? One would hope, given the circumstances, that you would strive for excellence. A job worth doing is worth doing well, don't you think? The last words were delivered with a mocking lilt, an insinuation that Elara's current standards were clearly beneath what was expected in this household. Elara kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her jaw tight. She swallowed, the bitter pill of gratitude making her throat constrict. To rise and confront Seraphina would only escalate the situation, and Elara had no energy left for battles she knew she would lose. She continued to scrub, her movements perhaps a little slower now, a silent rebellion against the tyranny of perfection. Seraphina's voice hardened, her initial feigned pleasantness dissolving. You know, Elara, it's truly a shame how things have turned out for you. Losing your home, ending up, well, here. One can't help but wonder if different choices along the way might have led to a different outcome. Perhaps a little more foresight, a bit more responsibility. The words were like tiny poisoned darts, each one aimed directly at the fresh wounds of Elara's grief and loss. Seraphina was not just criticizing her cleaning, she was dissecting Elara's entire life, implying her current plight was a direct consequence of her own supposed failures, her poor choices. Elara finally paused, her hands gripping the mop handle. Her voice, when it came, was soft, trembling slightly, but firm. I did my best, Seraphina. Always for Alistair, for our home. I always did my best. It was a quiet defense, a plea for understanding, a fragile assertion of her dignity. But Seraphina merely scoffed, a dismissive sound that brushed away Elara's words as if they were dust. Your best seems to have a rather limited definition then, doesn't it? Seraphina retorted, her tone dripping with disdain. These floors, for example, we're not running some charity hostel, Elara. There are standards to uphold. As Seraphina spoke, a ripple of light laughter drifted from the living room, where the guests were now fully engaged in their conversations. To Elara's ears, the sound seemed to swell and echo, morphing into a mocking chorus, a cruel soundtrack to her quiet humiliation. They were laughing at her, she was sure of it, their mirth amplifying her plight, making her feel even more exposed, more vulnerable. Suddenly, Seraphina's voice snapped, sharp and impatient. You're working too slowly, Elara. We have guests arriving, and this floor is still not glistening to my satisfaction. Her mask of detached judgment dropped completely, replaced by open irritation. We don't pay you to dawdle, you know. I expect our domestic help to be efficient. The term domestic help landed with the force of a physical blow, stripping away any last pretense of family, of respect. Elara was reduced to an employee, an object, less than human in their eyes. Elara's heart hammered in her chest, a frantic drum against her ribs. She tried to speed up, pushing the mop with renewed urgency, but her aging body protested. Her back screamed in protest, a fiery ache spreading through her spine. Her raw hands, already chafed from the relentless scrubbing, felt the friction of the mop handle like sandpaper against open wounds. Each movement was an effort, a struggle against the limitations of her physical form, against the emotional burden that weighed her down. As Elara maneuvered the mop, trying desperately to cover more ground, to meet Seraphina's impossible demands, Seraphina took a sudden step forward. Elara barely registered the movement before a stinging, searing pain exploded across her left cheek. A sharp, cracking sound echoed in the silence of the entryway. Seraphina had slapped her. The shock was immediate and profound. Elara gasped, stumbling backward, her grip on the mop handle loosening. Her hand flew to her cheek, which throbbed with a burning intensity. She felt the impact, not just physically, but deep within her soul. Tears, hot and involuntary, sprang to her eyes, blurring her vision. She lurched, her feet tangling, and for a terrifying moment she thought she would fall, collapsing onto the very floor she had been so meticulously cleaning. But her hand shot out, finding the cool, solid support of the wall, and she steadied herself, clutching at the plaster, her body trembling uncontrollably. Seraphina stood over her, her face transformed. The sweet mask was gone, replaced by a cold, hard cruelty that twisted her features. Her eyes, usually so calculating, now gleamed with a chilling satisfaction. "Clean this floor, right?" Seraphina's voice was a low growl, devoid of any sweetness, any pretense of politeness. It was raw, brutal, and utterly without remorse. Through her tears, Elara looked past Seraphina, her gaze drawn to the living room doorway. Eleanor stood there, framed by the elegant archway, and beside her, two of the guests. Their eyes were fixed on Elara, not with shock, not with horror, but with a horrifying, detached amusement. One of the guests, a woman with a perfectly coiffed blonde bob, even offered a small, knowing smile, as if witnessing a particularly entertaining spectacle. Eleanor chuckled, a low, throaty sound that grated on Elara's raw nerves. "Seraphina certainly knows how to handle difficult situations, doesn't she?" Her words were an endorsement, a validation of the violence, a public declaration that Elara deserved this treatment. The blonde guest nodded in agreement, her smile widening slightly. "Absolutely. Sometimes you just have to be firm with people who don't understand boundaries. Some people simply need to be shown." The words, the chuckles, the smiles, they pierced Elara's heart with icy precision. She wasn't just unwelcome here. She wasn't just a burden. She was an object of entertainment, a spectacle for their amusement. Her humiliation was complete, absolute, and publicly displayed. Every shred of dignity she had desperately clung to shattered around her. Before Elara could fully process the depth of this new, agonizing blow, Seraphina snatched the mop from the floor where it had fallen. With a sharp, forceful movement, she shoved the handle back into Elara's shaking hands. "Try again," Seraphina commanded, her voice a whip crack. "And this time, do it right. I want to see my reflection in that marble, Elara, and I want to see it now." Elara remained on her knees, the mop handle clutched in her shaking hands, her head bowed. The marble floor, which moments ago had been the focus of Seraphina's cruel demands, was now a shimmering, distorted canvas of her blurred tears. Each drop that fell felt like a physical weight, a testament to the profound humiliation that had just washed over her. She could still feel the phantom sting on her cheek, the echoes of Seraphina's harsh words ringing in her ears, the chilling amusement in the eyes of Eleanor and her guests. Her world had shrunk to this small, agonizing space, filled with her shame and their cold indifference. Then a distant sound cut through the suffocating silence, the familiar solid thud of a car door slamming shut outside. Elara's head lifted instinctively, a faint tremor of something unidentifiable stirring within her. It was followed by the heavy, rhythmic crunch of footsteps on the gravel driveway, growing closer, undeniably familiar. A sense of disbelieving hope, fragile and tentative, flickered in her heart. The front door, which Seraphina had left ajar, swung open wider. Standing there, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun, was a figure that made Elara's breath catch in her throat. It was Alistair, her son. He stood tall and broad-shouldered, clad in his crisp military fatigues, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. His face, usually strong and composed, was etched with the weariness of travel, but beneath that, a flicker of concern. He had returned unexpectedly from his deployment. Alistair's gaze swept across the entryway in an instant, taking in the scene before him like a trained observer. He saw his mother, Elara, on her hands and knees, mop in hand, tears streaming down her face. He saw the vivid red mark blooming on her cheek. He saw Seraphina, standing over her, a triumphant, almost smug expression on her face. And he saw Eleanor and the guests in the living room doorway, their smiles frozen, their gazes riveted, a tableau of casual cruelty and silent complicity. The weariness on Alistair's face vanished, replaced by something cold and hard. His eyes, usually warm and kind when they looked at his mother, now held a dangerous glint. "What the hell is going on here?" His voice was deadly quiet, a low rumble that vibrated with a building, barely contained fury. It was a voice Elara had rarely heard, reserved for moments of profound injustice or absolute command. Seraphina, a master of emotional manipulation, pivoted instantly. Her face, which had been set in a sneer, contorted into a mask of distress. Her eyes welled with fake tears, and she rushed towards Alistair, her arms outstretched. Alistair, thank God you're home, she cried, her voice a theatrical psalm. She clung to his arm, burrowing into his shoulder. Oh, darling, your mother has been so difficult. I don't know what to do with her. Her performance was flawless, designed to paint Elara as the aggressor, herself as the long-suffering victim. Alistair, however, did not return her embrace. His body remained stiff, unyielding. His eyes, dark and intense, remained fixed on Elara, who was still kneeling, frozen in place. Difficult? He repeated, his voice still dangerously low, each syllable carefully weighed. What do you mean difficult, Seraphina? Seraphina, emboldened by his apparent calm, pressed her advantage. She just won't listen, Alistair. I asked her to clean the entryway, and she kept insisting it was already clean. She was being so disrespectful, refusing to follow instructions. What was I to do? Sometimes you simply have to correct people when they don't understand the rules of the house. I had no choice, darling. I was forced to remind her of her place. She spoke with a self-righteous indignation, as if she were the aggrieved party, forced into an unpleasant but necessary action. As she spoke, Alistair took a step closer, gently disengaging from her grasp. His gaze, still locked on Elara, sharpened. He noticed the stark contrast of the pale skin and the vivid crimson mark on her cheek, an angry handprint etched onto his mother's face. His jaw clenched, a muscle working furiously. The dangerous quiet in his voice intensified, becoming almost a whisper, yet it vibrated with an ominous power. Did you hit my mother? He asked, the words barely audible. Yet they cut through the air like a knife. Seraphina recoiled slightly, her performance faltering. Hit her? No, Alistair, of course not. I merely gave her a gentle tap, a reminder. She was being so stubborn. I barely touched her. It was nothing. She clutched at her chest, feigning shock and offense, attempting to minimize her actions, to deny the undeniable. But Alistair had seen the mark. He had seen the tears. He had seen the way Elara was cowering, and he had heard Seraphina's thinly veiled confession. His composure shattered. Nothing? He roared, his voice exploding through the entryway, shaking the very foundations of the house. You hit my mother! My mother, how dare you lay a hand on her? The force of his rage was immediate and terrifying. The guests in the living room, who moments before had been idly amused, now scrambled. Their smiles vanished, replaced by wide-eyed panic. Chairs scraped against the floor, and hurried whispers filled the air as they began to gather their belongings, desperate to escape the volatile atmosphere. Eleanor, who had been chuckling with the neighbor, suddenly looked by, her casual amusement instantly dissolving into a horrified silence. Alistair's eyes blazing with fury, then softened as he looked at Elara. The rage was still there, a palpable tremor in his voice. But when he spoke to her, it was with a tenderness that was a stark contrast to his earlier outburst. Mom, he commanded, his voice shaking with the effort to control his fury. Get up from there. Elara, stunned and overwhelmed, struggled to obey. Her knees, stiff from the cold floor and the emotional trauma, protested. Her hands trembled as she pushed against the marble, trying to regain her footing. Alistair was by her side in an instant, dropping his duffel bag with a thud. His strong, steady hands reached out, gently grasping her arms, helping her to rise. His touch was firm, protective, and filled with a warmth that Elara hadn't felt in weeks, a stark contrast to the burning anger that still radiated from him like a palpable heat. He held her steady, his gaze still fixed on Seraphina, his fury now focused, precise, and absolutely terrifying. Alistair stood tall, his presence filling the entryway with a furious intensity. His hand remained on Elara's arm, a steadying anchor as she clung to him, still trembling. His eyes, however, were fixed solely on Seraphina, who now stood pale and defensive, her earlier bravado replaced by a flicker of fear. The guests in the living room had mostly retreated, their hushed whispers and hurried movements indicating their desire to be anywhere else. Only Eleanor and her husband, Mr. M. Harrison, remained, rooted to their spots, their faces a mixture of shock and indignation. Seraphina, Alistair began, his voice still tightly controlled, though the underlying rage was unmistakable. Explain to me precisely why my mother was on her hands and knees, scrubbing your floor like a servant. He gestured with his free hand, encompassing Elara's current state and the mop lying haphazardly beside her. The accusation hung heavy in the air, undeniable. Eleanor, ever the defender of her daughter's perceived innocence, interjected swiftly. Now, Alistair, there's no need for such dramatics. Elara was simply helping out. She's family, after all. We offered her a place to stay, and she was just doing her part. She attempted to sound reasonable, but her voice held a forced cheerfulness that grated against the tension. Alistair's gaze flickered to Eleanor, a flash of contempt in his eyes, before returning to Seraphina. Helping out? He scoffed, his voice laced with incredulity. He gestured to the marble floor which gleamed even through Elara's tear-filled eyes. This floor is spotless, Seraphina. It looks like it could eat off it. Why was my mother cleaning it for a third time today? Seraphina, regaining a sliver of her defiance, tossed her head. Because she missed spots, Alistair. She's not as thorough as she thinks. I was simply maintaining the standards of this house, something your mother clearly isn't used to. The insult was direct, a cruel jab at Elara's presumed lack of domestic prowess. Alistair took a step closer, his presence radiating menace. And your standards include hitting a 64-year-old woman? He retorted, his voice rising in volume, echoing off the high ceilings. He released Elara's arm for a moment, pointing a damning finger at the red mark still starkly visible on her cheek. Do your standards dictate that physical abuse is an acceptable form of correction? Seraphina bristled, her eyes narrowing. She had walked into his trap. Her biggest mistake, one she would soon regret, spilled from her lips in a fit of self-righteous indignation. Well, maybe, she snapped, her voice shrill with defensiveness. Maybe if she'd do things right the first time, I wouldn't have to correct her. The temperature in the entryway seemed to drop several degrees. Alistair's fury, which had been simmering beneath the surface, now coalesced into a chilling calm. His voice dropped to a deadly quiet, a whisper that was far more terrifying than his earlier shouts. Did you just say, he articulated each word slowly, deliberately, that you needed to correct my mother? He turned fully to face Seraphina, his body a rigid line of barely restrained power. You have no idea, Seraphina, he began, his voice gaining strength, each word a hammer blow. No idea the sacrifices this woman has made. You talk about doing things right. You talk about correction. His gaze swept over Seraphina, then Eleanor, then Mr. Harrison, encompassing them all in his scorn. My father left us when I was 8 years old, Alistair continued, his voice heavy with a pain that resonated deep within Elara's own heart. 8 years old. My mother was alone. She didn't have a sprawling house like this. She didn't have standards of expensive china and spotless marble floors. She had a scared little boy and a mountain of bills. He paused, taking a breath that seemed to vibrate with untold history. She worked 3 jobs, Seraphina, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. She cleaned other people's houses, not because she was domestic help, but so I could have food on the table. She worked in a noisy, dangerous factory, standing on her feet for 12 hours a day, so I could have new school clothes. She took in laundry, washing and ironing by hand late into the night, just to pay for my books. Elara, standing beside him, listened as if hearing these stories for the first time. The tears, which had been unshed, now flowed freely down her cheeks. He remembered. He truly remembered. She had tried so hard to shield him from the hardship, to make him believe their struggles were just part of life. Alistair's voice dropped again, raw with a pain Elara had thought he'd forgotten. When I was 15, I needed a new school uniform. We couldn't afford it. She took on extra shifts at the factory, operating a press. And one day, his voice caught. One day, she had an accident, a severe one. She lost 3 fingers from her left hand, Seraphina. He held up Elara's left hand, gently turning it to reveal the disfigured digits, a sight that still made Elara wince. She never complained, not once. When I asked her what happened, she smiled and told me it was a silly cooking accident, that the knife slipped. She bandaged it up herself and went back to work the next week, learning to do everything with her other hand, so I wouldn't know the truth, so I wouldn't worry, so I could have that uniform. He then looked directly at Seraphina, his eyes blazing. She did that, Seraphina. She sacrificed her body, her livelihood, her very self so I could have a chance at a better life. She worked day and night, selling her time, her health, her youth, so I could go to college, so I could become the man I am today, so I could make something of myself. He leaned in, his voice a furious whisper. You didn't know any of this, did you, Seraphina? You didn't know about the 3 days, the factory, the fingers, the endless, unspoken sacrifices. And do you know why you didn't know? His voice swelled with bitter accusation. Because you never bothered to ask. You never bothered to care. You just saw a charity case, a burden, a domestic helper to be corrected and humiliated. Eleanor, who had been listening with a look of growing discomfort, now stepped forward, attempting to intervene. Now, Alistair, that's enough. You're upsetting everyone. You don't understand the full situation here. Alistair rounded on her, his fury undiminished, if anything, intensified by her weak defense. Upsetting everyone? He scoffed, his gaze sweeping over Eleanor and Mr. Harrison. You want to talk about upsetting? You and your daughter have been systematically humiliating my mother, the woman who gave me everything, under your own roof. You called her a charity case to your neighbors. You laughed at her while she was on her knees, crying, a mark on her face from your daughter's hand. Mr. Harrison, Eleanor's husband, puffed out his chest, his face turning a mottled red. Now hold on a minute, young man, he blustered, stepping forward menacingly. You're in my house. You don't come in here and speak to my wife and daughter that way. Alistair met his gaze, unflinching. A dangerous smile touched his lips. Your house, he repeated, his voice dangerously soft, yet it carried an undeniable weight of challenge. We'll see about that, won't we? The challenge in Alistair's voice, your house? We'll see about that, won't we? Hung heavy in the air. He did not wait for a response from Mr. Harrison, whose face had gone from red to an alarming shade of purple. Instead, Alistair tightened his grip on Elara's arm, his eyes sweeping across the opulent entryway, then settling on Eleanor. Show me, he demanded, his voice a low growl, where my mother has been staying. An uncomfortable silence descended upon the grand hallway. Eleanor and Seraphina exchanged a quick, furtive glance, a silent communication of dismay. Seraphina's bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by a nervous tremor in her posture. Mr. Harrison, momentarily stunned by Alistair's intensity, seemed to deflate slightly. After a long, tense moment, Eleanor finally cleared her throat. Right this way, Alistair, she muttered, her voice now devoid of its usual imperiousness, tinged with a reluctant resignation. She led them through a dimly lit back corridor, past the sparkling kitchen and laundry room, deeper into the less traveled parts of the house. The pristine, elegant decor of the main living spaces gave way to utilitarian walls and stacked boxes. The air grew noticeably cooler, and a faint, musty odor began to permeate the space. Eleanor stopped before a plain, unmarked door, pushing it open with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of her reluctance. Elara gasped softly as she looked inside. It was a storage room, cramped and windowless, filled with miscellaneous items. Old luggage, seasonal decorations, dusty sports equipment. In one corner, squeezed between towering boxes, was a small, uncomfortable-looking cot. A thin, worn blanket was folded neatly at its foot, and a single, flat pillow lay at the head. The air in the room was stagnant, heavy with the smell of mildew and forgotten things. This was where she had been sleeping. This was her temporary stay. Alistair stared at the dismal space, his jaw clenching so hard that Elara could see the muscle twitching. His eyes, when they met Eleanor's, were blazing with a cold, righteous fury. You've been making my mother sleep down here, he said, his voice barely controlled, each word laced with disbelief and outrage. The question was not really a question, but a damning accusation. Eleanor, attempting to regain some semblance of authority, straightened her shoulders defensively. It's perfectly adequate, Alistair. It's dry, it's warm, and it's certainly better than nothing. Your mother was quite grateful for any space we could offer, given her situation. We opened our home to her out of kindness. Her voice rose with indignant justification, as if the cramped, mildew-smelling closet was a palace. Alistair ignored her, his gaze sweeping over the pathetic cot. Then turning to Elara, his eyes filled with a heartbreak that mirrored her own. "Mom," he whispered, his voice raw with pain. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me you were living like this?" Elara felt a fresh wave of tears welling up. Her throat was tight, choked with shame and the desire to protect him. "I didn't want to bother you, Alistair," she managed to whisper, her voice trembling. "You were deployed, serving your country. I didn't want you to worry. I knew you had enough on your plate." The excuse felt hollow, even to her own ears, but it was the truth of her intention, however misguided. Alistair turned back to Seraphina, his eyes blazing with renewed intensity. "See this, Seraphina?" he said, gesturing to Elara. "This woman, my mother. She is more important than you, more important than anyone. She would sacrifice everything for her son, and you repay her by treating her like garbage under the guise of helping her feel useful." His voice was a whip crack, slicing through her flimsy excuses. "I saw it," he exploded, his voice shaking with the sheer force of his emotion. "I saw my mother on her hands and knees, crying, with your handprint on her face, while a room full of people laughed at her. And even after all that, she still thanks you. She still makes excuses for you. She still worries about bothering her son. That's the kind of woman she is, Seraphina. That's the kind of love, the kind of selfless dedication that runs in our family. Something you clearly know nothing about." Seraphina, seeing her carefully constructed facade crumbling, tried a different tactic. Her face crumpled, and she began to sob, genuine tears now mingling with her earlier feigned ones. "Alistair, please. You don't understand. I've been under so much stress. It's been difficult managing the house. And your mother? I love your mother, I do. I lost my temper. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake." She reached for him, attempting to grasp his hand, to appeal to his affection. But Alistair pulled away, his face etched with disgust. "Stress?" he scoffed. "Love? Don't insult my intelligence, Seraphina. You've been lying to me for months. Months! You've been deliberately misleading me about my mother's well-being." He turned back to Elara, his gaze softening slightly, but the anguish in his eyes was profound. "Mom," he said, his voice pleading, "when exactly did you lose your house? Seraphina told me it was only a couple of weeks ago, just before I deployed again." Elara hesitated, glancing nervously at Seraphina, then back at her son's heartbroken face. The truth, however humiliating, had to come out. "No, Alistair," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It wasn't 2 weeks. It was 3 months ago." Alistair's eyes widened in shock. 3 months. That was before his last deployment. "But you told me you were staying with Mrs. Davies, that you were helping her with her garden, remember?" he said, his brow furrowed in confusion. Alara's gaze dropped to the floor, her cheeks burning anew. "I was," she admitted, her voice even softer, "for a short while. But she became ill, and I couldn't impose on her any longer." She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the next confession. The deepest shame. She leaned closer to Alistair, almost whispering the words so only he could hear. "Before Seraphina offered me a place, Alistair, I was sleeping in my car. For a few days. I didn't know what else to do." Alistair stood frozen, his face paling, the color draining from his cheeks. His eyes, wide with horror, stared at Elara as if seeing her for the very first time. "You were sleeping in your car," he repeated, the words a choked gasp. The magnitude of her suffering, hidden beneath her stoic silence, hit him with the force of a physical blow. Then his head snapped towards Seraphina, his eyes blazing with a renewed, terrifying fury. "How long, Seraphina?" he demanded, his voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "How long did you know my mother was sleeping in her car?" Alistair's question, "How long did you know my mother is sleeping in her car?" hung in the stale, mildew-scented air of the storage room. His voice, though quiet, was charged with a terrifying intensity. Seraphina, cornered and exposed, finally broke. Her face, tear-streaked and pale, contorted in a grimace of defeat. About 2 months, Alistair, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes darting nervously between Alistair and her parents, who stood frozen in the doorway, silent witnesses to their daughter's crumbling facade. Alistair stared at her, utterly staggered. The words seemed to echo in his mind, 2 months. He tried to process it, to reconcile this horrific revelation with the woman he had married. My mother, he enunciated slowly, painfully, has been homeless for 2 months, and you didn't tell me? You let her sleep in her car, and you didn't tell me? His voice rose with each question, disbelief battling with a profound sense of betrayal. Seraphina, desperately grasping for an excuse, retorted, "But you were deployed, Alistair. What was I supposed to do? You couldn't be disturbed?" Alistair scoffed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Don't you dare use my deployment as an excuse for your callousness, Seraphina. I could have sent money. I could have requested emergency leave. My commanding officer would have understood. My mother's well-being is always a priority." His anger intensified with the realization that not only had Seraphina withheld information, but she had actively prevented him from helping his own mother. Then, a chilling thought struck him. He remembered receiving a few vague messages from Elara after he'd been deployed, always brief and reassuring, stating she was fine and with Mrs. Davies. But there had been a period of silence. He turned to Elara, his eyes narrowed. "Mom, did you try to reach me when you lost the house? For Seraphina offered you this cot?" Elara nodded slowly, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. "Yes, Alistair. I called a few times. I left messages with Seraphina to tell you I needed help, but she always told me you were busy, that you couldn't be disturbed. She said she'd handle it." Alistair's blood ran cold. He looked at Seraphina, his face a mask of furious comprehension. "You intercepted her calls for help, didn't you? You deliberately prevented my mother from contacting me. You stood by and watched her suffer, and then you offered her this prison, as if you were doing her a great favor." He gestured around the cramped, desolate room. Seraphina, seeing her lies exposed, tried to rationalize her actions, though her voice lacked conviction. "I was handling it, Alistair. I brought her here, didn't I? I was going to tell you everything when you got back. It was all under control." Alistair's anger, already a raging inferno, intensified, consuming any last shred of affection or respect he held for her. The full scope of her deception, her casual cruelty, and her calculated manipulation hit him like a physical blow. She hadn't just mistreated his mother, she had actively, deliberately, and with malice, concealed his mother's suffering from him, his only son. "What else, Seraphina?" Alistair demanded, his voice dangerously low, resonating with a barely contained fury. "What else haven't you told me? What other situations have you handled on my behalf?" Seraphina hesitated, glancing nervously at Eleanor, who was now openly distraught. "Well," she stammered, "she did ask a while ago if she could borrow some money for an apartment. But we couldn't afford it, Alistair. You know how tight things are with the mortgage and our expenses. We simply didn't have the spare cash." Alistair let out a short, bitter laugh. "Couldn't afford it?" he repeated, shaking his head in disgusted disbelief. He looked directly into Seraphina's eyes. "Seraphina, I have $30,000 in my personal savings account. That's $30,000 that I specifically set aside for my mother's future, for emergencies, for anything she might need. Money you knew about. Money I told you to give her if she ever needed it." The revelation hung in the air, a final crushing blow to Seraphina's flimsy excuses. Eleanor gasped, and Mr. Harrison's face paled further. The sheer avarice, the cold calculation behind Seraphina's actions was now laid bare for all to see. She had not only denied Elara a place to live, she had denied her the means to secure one for herself, all while knowing Alistair had provided for just such a contingency. Alistair's gaze, now devoid of any warmth, settled on Seraphina. "You are not my family," he stated, his voice flat, resolute. He looked at Eleanor and Mr. Harrison. "And neither are you. My mother," he declared, pulling Elara gently closer. "My mother is my family. She is all the family I need." The words shattered Seraphina's world, severing her from any claim she thought she had on Alistair, on his life, on his family. He then turned to face Seraphina and her parents, his eyes burning with an unyielding anger. "This," he said, gesturing around the miserable storage room, "this is how you treat the woman who raised me, who sacrificed everything for me. You exploit her vulnerability. You call her a charity case. You make her scrub your floors like a slave. You hit her, and then you lie to me about it, all while knowing I had provided for her every need." His questions hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. No one had an answer. Their silence was their confession. Alistair turned back to Elara, his rage momentarily receding, replaced by a profound remorse. His voice softened, tinged with guilt. "Mom, I am so sorry," he whispered, his eyes filled with pain. "I am so sorry I put you through this. I should have known better. I trusted her, and I should have known better than to trust anyone with your care." He looked at Seraphina one last time, his decision clear and unwavering. "Pack your things, Seraphina," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "We're done. This is over." Seraphina's face crumpled completely. She fell to her knees, clutching at his fatigues. "No, Alistair, please, don't do this. I love you, love you. It was a mistake. Just give me another chance. We can fix this." Her pleas were desperate, her earlier arrogance completely gone. Alistair gently but firmly detached himself from her grasp. His face was set, unyielding. "This isn't a fight, Seraphina," he stated, his voice quiet but final. "This isn't a disagreement we can fix. This is you. This is you showing me exactly who you are, precisely what you are capable of. And I cannot, will not tolerate it." He then turned to Elara, his hand once again firm and reassuring on her arm. "Mom," he said, his voice filled with a new resolve, "get your things. We're leaving. We're leaving this place and we're leaving these people behind. We are choosing right over wrong. We are choosing dignity over humiliation. And we are choosing family, true family, over everything else." The drive from Eleanor's grand house to Alistair's modest military apartment was cloaked in a heavy silence. Elara sat in the passenger seat, the events of the past hour replaying in her mind like a jarring, painful film. In the rearview mirror, she could occasionally glimpse Seraphina's parents standing on their porch, watching them leave, their faces a mixture of confusion and anger. Alistair's face was a stone mask, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The only sounds were the hum of the engine, and faintly through the closed windows, the distant, muffled sobs of Seraphina, who had collapsed onto the front lawn as they drove away. Alistair's grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled. Elara could feel the palpable guilt emanating from him, a silent self-reproach that mirrored her own suppressed emotions. After several minutes of quiet, Alistair finally spoke, his voice low and raspy. "I should have seen it, Mom. I should have seen through her. I blame myself for this, for everything you went through." Elara reached out, gently placing her hand on his forearm. "Alistair, you were serving your country. You trusted her. It's not your fault." He shook his head, a muscle twitching in his cheek. "No, Mom, it is. I missed the signs. The way she subtly dismissed you, the way she would make passive-aggressive comments. I just brushed it off, thinking it was typical marital squabbles. I was a fool." His voice hardened, a note of grim determination entering it. "But I'm not going back, Mom. Some things are unforgivable. What she did to you, the way she deliberately deceived me, the cruelty, I can't look past that." Elara, despite her own pain, felt a flicker of the old maternal instinct to protect her son, to mend what was broken. "Marriage is hard work, Alistair," she murmured, trying to temper his resolve. "People make mistakes. Perhaps she can change." He turned to her, his eyes firm. "There's a difference, Mom, between making a mistake and deliberate cruelty, between a disagreement and calculated deception. What Seraphina did was not a mistake. It was a pattern of behavior designed to diminish you, to control me, and to exploit our trust. She watched you suffer. She lied to me. She stole from you the chance for me to help you. That is unforgivable." His resolve was unshakable, and Elara knew in that moment that his decision was final. They arrived at Alistair's apartment, a small but impeccably tidy space in a modest complex. It was functional, with military precision evident in its organization, but to Elara, after the cold grandeur and hidden confines of Seraphina's parents' home, it felt warm, safe, and profoundly welcoming. A sanctuary. "This is it for now, Mom," Alistair said, opening the door for her. "It's not much, but it's ours." He led her to the small bedroom. "You take the bed, I'll take the couch." Elara started to protest. "But Alistair, you're the one who just came home from deployment. You need your rest." He cut her off gently. "Mom, you've been sleeping on a cot in a storage room for weeks, after being homeless for months. This is non-negotiable. You take the bed, I'll be perfectly fine on the couch." And with that, he insisted, leaving no room for argument. That night, tucked into Alistair's comfortable, if somewhat sparse bed, Elara found herself doing something she hadn't done in months. She thought about the future. For the first time since her world had crumbled, a sense of hope, fragile but real, began to bloom. The suffocating weight of gratitude was lifted, replaced by the quiet strength of her son's unwavering love. She wasn't a burden, she was cherished. She wasn't alone, she had Alistair. The possibilities, once extinguished, flickered to life again. The next morning, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the small apartment. Elara and Alistair sat at the small kitchen table, sipping their mugs in comfortable silence. The tension from the previous day had eased, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. "We'll face this together, Mom," Alistair said, breaking the silence, his voice firm and reassuring. "Whatever comes next, you're not going through this alone anymore. I promise you that." Elara looked at him, her heart swelling with a love so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was her son, her anchor, her protector. Just as they finished their coffee, a tentative knock sounded at the door. Both Elara and Alistair exchanged a look. Alistair's jaw tightened. He knew who it was. He walked to the door, hesitating for a moment before pulling it open. Standing on the threshold was Seraphina. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes swollen and red, her clothes rumpled. She looked utterly distraught, a stark contrast to the perfectly composed woman Elara had known. There was a faint but unmistakable scent of alcohol clinging to her. "Alistair, please," Seraphina whispered, her voice hoarse. "I need to talk to you, please. Just 5 minutes." Alistair's face was unreadable. He glanced back at Elara, then sighed. 5 minutes, he conceded, stepping aside to allow her entry, but making no move to comfort her. Seraphina stumbled slightly as she entered, her gaze immediately falling on Elara, who sat quietly at the table. Seraphina avoided eye contact, her eyes fixed on Alistair. The alcohol on her breath was more noticeable now, a bitter edge to her desperation. "You were right, Elara," Seraphina began, her voice cracking, surprisingly addressing Elara directly first. "You were always right. I didn't truly love Alistair. Not him. Not really. I loved the idea of him. The military husband, the respect, the stability, the life I thought I wanted." She paused, choking back a sob. "And I hated that you were a part of that. I hated that you had this history, this claim on him, that I couldn't understand. I tried to manage you, to make you smaller, less important, so I could have my perfect military wife life." She took a shaky breath, her gaze finally meeting Elara's, filled with a raw, desperate pain. "I saw your grief, Elara. I saw your desperation, your vulnerability. And I made it worse. I exploited it. I used it. I thought it would make me feel more in control, more powerful. But all it did was make me into this." She gestured vaguely at her own disheveled appearance, her voice thick with self-loathing. Seraphina's confession hung heavy in the air, thick with the scent of cheap liquor and regret. Her tear-filled eyes, however, showed a flicker of genuine understanding, a stark contrast to the performative sadness of the previous day. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Alistair. Elara," she mumbled, her voice hoarse. "I truly understand now. You're better off without me." Elara, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke, her voice clear and steady. "Better off without you, yes, but you weren't right about everything, Seraphina." She met Seraphina's gaze directly. "You told me my poor choices led to my situation. But your choices, Seraphina, led to this. Your choices to hurt me, to lie to Alistair, to put your own perceived status above basic human decency. She paused, taking a breath. You didn't love Alistair, not truly. You loved the idea of him, the security, the prestige of being a military wife, the image. If you had truly loved him, you would have loved the people who made him who he is. You would have respected his past and understood the sacrifices that shaped him. You would have cherished his mother, not tried to break her. Alistair watched Elara, a profound sense of pride swelling in his chest. His mother, once a victim, now spoke with quiet strength and dignity. He looked at Seraphina, and in that moment, any last flicker of love, any lingering affection he might have held for her, died in his eyes. He saw only a stranger, a cruel and manipulative woman who had brought profound pain to the person he loved most in the world. That's enough, Seraphina, Alistair said, his voice cold and flat, utterly devoid of emotion. You've had your 5 minutes, now leave, and don't come back. Seraphina opened her mouth to protest, but Alistair's unwavering stare, devoid of any weakness, silenced her. With a final broken sob, she turned and stumbled out of the apartment, leaving behind only the lingering scent of alcohol and a profound sense of closure. After Seraphina was gone, the small apartment felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. Alistair sat beside Elara, running a hand through his hair. It hurts, Mom, he admitted, his voice softer now, knowing that I was so wrong about someone I loved. But there's also a relief in knowing the truth, no matter how ugly it is. He stood up, walking to the window, gazing out at the quiet street. I'm starting divorce proceedings immediately, he announced, his voice resolute. And I'm changing all my beneficiaries. Everything goes to you, Mom. My life insurance, my savings, everything. He then turned, a determined glint in his eyes. And this apartment is too small for us. I've already started looking for a bigger place, a 2-bedroom, something comfortable where you can have your own space. Elara began to protest. Alistair, you don't have to do that. I'm not a burden. He interrupted her gently but firmly. You are not a burden, Mom. You are my mother. You spent your entire life caring for me, sacrificing everything. It's my turn now. It's my honor to care for you. This isn't charity. This is family. This is love. His words, filled with unwavering devotion, washed over Elara, soothing the old wounds of humiliation and self-doubt. In the days that followed, a remarkable transformation began to unfold within Elara. With Alistair's steadfast support, the hope and pride that had been suffocated for so long began to return. She started to realize her own self-worth, a value not tied to her utility or her ability to please, but inherent in who she was. The vibrant, resilient woman Alistair remembered was slowly, steadily emerging from the shadows. 3 weeks later, Elara had settled into a new routine. She spent her mornings researching job opportunities, her afternoons exploring local libraries and community centers, reconnecting with the world outside the confines of Seraphina's parents' house. Her confidence, battered but not broken, was slowly rebuilding. One evening, as they shared a simple dinner, Alistair informed her of an update. Seraphina has moved back in with her parents, he said, his voice neutral. Apparently, she's been telling everyone that I chose my mother over her, as if that was the reason for our divorce. Elara frowned. That's not what happened, Alistair. He nodded. Exactly. I didn't choose you over her, Mom. I chose right over wrong. I chose dignity over degradation. I chose honesty over deceit. That's a very different thing. The distinction was important, a testament to Alistair's unwavering moral compass. The next morning, as Elara was preparing her resume, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. She answered, a slight tremor of nervousness in her voice. Hello? Is this Elara? A kind voice asked. My name is Lillian Thorne. I'm the head librarian at the Riverside Community Library. Alistair gave us your name. We have a part-time position available, helping with shelving and community outreach, and he spoke very highly of your experience and passion for books. We'd love to offer you an interview. Elara's heart leaped. Alistair had been quietly networking for her, working behind the scenes to help her regain her independence and purpose. A library, a place of quiet contemplation, of knowledge, of community. It felt like a fresh breath of air, a genuine opportunity. Yes, she managed, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, I'd love an interview. The future, once a bleak and uncertain landscape, suddenly shimmered with exciting possibilities. A few days later, while Elara was out running errands, a familiar figure emerged from a local grocery store. It was Seraphina. She looked different now, less polished, more subdued, and without the aggressive sheen she once possessed. There was a quietness about her, a genuine weariness that seemed to have replaced her former arrogance. Their eyes met across the parking lot. Seraphina approached hesitantly, her head bowed slightly. "Elara," she began, her voice soft and sincere. "I know you don't owe me anything, but I wanted to tell you I truly am sorry. For everything. I was wrong, completely and utterly wrong. You deserve so much better." There was no manipulation in her voice now, no pretense, just a raw, honest apology. The interview at the Riverside Community Library felt like a breath of fresh air. Lillian Thorne, a woman with kind eyes and a thoughtful demeanor, listened intently as Elara, encouraged by Alistair, shared not just her work experience but fragments of her recent ordeal. She spoke of losing her home, the challenges she faced, and the quiet resilience she had discovered within herself. She didn't dwell on the pain, but rather on the lessons learned, the newfound appreciation for simple kindness, and her yearning to contribute meaningfully to her community. Lillian, sensing Alara's genuine spirit and inherent strength, saw beyond the gaps in her resume. "Elara," Lillian said, her smile warm, "we'd be delighted to offer you the part-time position. Your life experience, your empathy, and your clear love for books and people are exactly what we look for. You have a unique strength that will be a wonderful asset here." Alara's heart swelled with joy. She accepted immediately, tears blurring her vision once more. But these were tears of gratitude and hope. That evening she celebrated with Alistair. They cooked a simple but delicious meal together in his small kitchen, the air filled with laughter and a profound sense of shared triumph. "You know, Alistair," Elara mused, a lightness in her voice she hadn't heard in years. "Seraphina's cruelty, as terrible as it was, became a kind of wake-up call. It forced me to look at myself, to truly value who I am, not what I have or what I can do for others." She reflected on the journey she had just begun, the journey from merely surviving to truly living. She remembered the fierce love that had driven her to work 3 jobs, to endure hardship, all to give Alistair a better life. She had taught him to stand up for what was right, and now he had, for her. Over the next 2 months, Elara thrived at the library. She found purpose in organizing shelves, helping patrons, and assisting with children's story time. The quiet hum of the library, the scent of old paper and new beginnings, became her sanctuary. She made friends among her colleagues, and the isolation that had plagued her for months began to dissipate. It was during one of the library's volunteer literacy program meetings that she met Arthur. He was a retired English teacher, a gentleman with a gentle smile, a quick wit, and a twinkle in his kind blue eyes. He was volunteering to help adults improve their reading skills, a program Elara was helping to coordinate. They connected effortlessly, finding common ground in their love for literature and their shared passion for community. Their conversations stretched longer and longer, always ending with a reluctant farewell. A few weeks later, Arthur, with a charmingly old-fashioned earnestness, asked Elara if she would consider having the coffee with him. It was a new beginning in her personal life, unexpected and warmly welcomed. Alistair, watching his mother bloom, was genuinely happy. "This is just the beginning, Mom," he had told her, a proud smile on his face. "This is just the start of everything good." 6 months after her departure from Seraphina's parents' house, Elara moved into her own small, bright, one-bedroom apartment. It wasn't grand, but it was entirely hers, paid for with her own hard-earned money from the library. It was a testament to her independence, her resilience, and her burgeoning confidence. Arthur and Elara were now officially dating, enjoying a quiet, mature happiness that brought a peaceful contentment into Elara's life. Their relationship was built on mutual respect, shared interests, and a gentle understanding that came with age and experience. One sunny afternoon, Alistair arrived for lunch at Elara's new apartment, a stack of real estate listings tucked under his arm. After they finished eating, he spread the listings across her small kitchen table. "Mom," he began, his eyes bright with excitement, I've been thinking. I know you're happy here, and I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished. He gestured to the apartment, then to her. But I miss you. I miss having you around. We're a team, you and I. I want to buy a house, Mom. A real house, a home for both of us. Elara looked at the listings, then at her son. Her heart swelled. You want us to live together again? She asked, a tentative joy blooming within her. Not out of need, Mom, Alistair clarified, his gaze earnest, but because I want to, because I love you, because I miss our daily routine, our conversations, just having you there. I want to build a life with you, a comfortable, stable home that's truly ours. Elara envisioned a small garden, a guest room for Arthur, a cozy study for their books. This was a future she desired, a future built on love and choice, not obligation. Yes, Alistair, she said, a wide smile spreading across her face. Yes, I'd like that very much. She shared the news with Arthur later that day. His reaction was pure warmth. That's wonderful, Elara, he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. A son's love for his mother is a beautiful thing, and a secure, happy home is exactly what you deserve. His understanding and support only deepened Elara's affection for him. 3 months later, Elara and Alistair moved into their new 3-bedroom house. It was modest but charming, with a sunlit kitchen in a small backyard where Elara immediately began planning her garden. They converted one of the spare rooms into a shared study, filled with books and a comfortable reading chair. It was a place of peace, warmth, and genuine belonging. Their housewarming party was a joyous occasion, filled with laughter, the warm presence of old friends, Alistair's army buddies, and Arthur. As Elara watched Alistair mingle, his face alight with happiness, he came over to her, his arm around her shoulders. No regrets, Mom, he whispered, his gaze sweeping across their new home. Not a single one. This life, with you, is everything. And seeing you become yourself again, it's the greatest reward. Another 6 months passed, bringing with it an even deeper contentment. On a beautiful spring afternoon in the newly flourishing backyard garden of her new home, Elara married Arthur. It was a small, intimate ceremony filled with love and warmth. Alistair, proud and beaming, walked her down the aisle, his hand firm and steady in hers. As she stood beside Arthur, holding his hand, Elara reflected on her extraordinary journey. She had lost so much, but gained so much more. She had found a love that was chosen, not needed, a partnership of equals built on shared joy and understanding. She hoped somewhere that Seraphina had found her own path to self-awareness, that she had learned that true happiness could never be built on diminishing others. Elara had lost a house, Yistem, but she had found a home, both within herself and with the people who truly cherished her. She had regained her self-worth, found love, and created a life that was rich, fulfilling, and truly worth living.